So this is the second part to the historical materialism of Karl Marx, which is also known as the materialist conception of history. So here, as we have already discussed, what is historical materialism? It is the perspective of the history of society through the eyes of economy. So Karl Marx through historical materialism is answering the questions of how society has evolved, how society has progressed and has been able to reach the stage where we are in, and the main reason through which society progresses, because of which society progresses, is because of the mode of production. When the mode of production changes, society also changes. Society moves on. So in this way, he has said that the society has moved on from one stage to another stage because of the change in the mode of production. And this mode of production and this change and these stages of society, Karl Marx has divided into 5 stages. So the first stage is primitive communalism. Primitive communalism is the first stage in the history of society. This stage is the stage of the early man, where the people were hunters and gatherers, moving from one place to another, hunting wild animals, searching for food, grains and other edible plants. They had to struggle against nature, and in order to do this, because they had very less power over nature, that is why they had to live together. That is why they formed tribes, that is a collection of families, because if they lived alone, there was very little chance of survival. In this stage, the tools of production was very simple. They used bows, arrows, sticks and stones, because of which anyone could reproduce it. There was no such thing as monopoly of ownership over the tools. Secondly, the production was at a low scale. The people existed more or less on a subsistence level, that is, they did not have any surplus value. Their production was just sufficient to meet the needs of the people, provided everybody worked. Therefore, it was a situation of no master and no servant, all were equal. There was common ownership of property, because there was no private property here, and because there was no private property, there was no class division, and because no class division, that is why no inequality. Also, all the products that were produced or everything that was hunted, that was shared equally. But despite all these good aspects of primitive communalism, we cannot say that it was a very golden age. And over time, this primitive communalism also changed and it moved on to the next stage. It declined. So what led to this decline? There was development in the means or forces of production, and there was improvement in the tools of production. Metal tools and implements replaced those of stone and wood. The wooden plow, bronze, iron axes, iron spear tips, arrowheads started to be used. People started domesticating livestock and growing crops in settled communities. And handicrafts also started coming up, such as metalworking tool, weapon making, cloth making, footwear, and all of these started started to take place. So as there was improvement in the tools of production, the production also started to rise, and people started to have a surplus. So when the tools of production started to be improved, there started to be people who had some people who had more improved tools of production, whereas the other who had none. So those who had improved tools of production, they started to gain power. They started to have their own private property. They started to have a monopoly over the tools, which was not there earlier. So because of this, the people who did not have the improved tools of production, they started to work with the people who had the tools of production, and those who had the means or the forces of production, they started to exploit those who did not have anything. So this way, when earlier there was no private property, when earlier there was no inequality, because of this improvement in the tools of production, society became divided into two classes for the first time, and that gave rise to the slavery system. And the two classes that first arose was the slaves and the slave owners. This they started to have the society was divided into two classes, and there was the end of primitive communalism, and what came about was the slave society, where the people, those who did not have the tools, those who did not have anything with them, they worked as slaves for those who had the means of production, those who had the tools or forces of production. Thus was born the division of society into classes, one of which owned means of production and used them to exploit those who did not have anything. So the next stage after primitive communalism that comes about, as we have said, it is the slavery stage. So it is the first stage with private property and the first stage with the division of classes, where the people were divided, where the society was divided into two classes between the slaves and the slave owners. Here the slaves and the slave owners' relationship was very bad because the slaves were treated no less than a commodity. They was just like a mean of production, where here in the slavery stage the means of production were slaves, land, animals and tools. And even though the slavery stage, because of the slavery stage there was increased production more than the primitive communalism stage, but then society always tries to improve production. And later on, even though this stage lasted for a long period of time, later on even this stage declined. So what led to the decline was that again it was the improvement in the tools of production, because society is always constantly looking to improve the means of production, improve production. And in the slavery stage, the production was not up to the mark in the slavery system. Why? Because here the slaves did not have any incentive to work. They did not have anything. They did not have the ownership to the tools. They did not have any right to what was produced, and they did not get anything. They were just treated as a commodity. So hence there was conflict between the slaves and the slave owners, and this led to the next stage of production, or this led to improvement in the mode of production. So because there was the production was lagging behind, and the society was constantly trying for a new new means to improve production, so this again led rise, and because of the conflict, so again this slavery system also declined, and a new stage of production started to come in, that is the feudal stage. The third stage that comes about in the history of society is feudalism, where here the society is divided into serfs and the landowners. The serfs are those who were attached to the land. They did not have a land of their own, but they were allowed to work in the land of the landowners. So they were in a much better position than the slaves, who did not have anything with them. And here in feudalism, the production that took place, the production that happened was much better than the slavery system, because of the use of animal power, new machines, irrigation and new means of production that was there. So as I said earlier, society is always trying to look for the improvement in the production process. So because slavery was not, the slavery was lagging behind, because the workers did not have any incentive to work. They did not want to work for themselves. They did not want to work. They did not want to improve anything. So that is why the production was lagging behind. Conflict, and because of everything, because of the lag in production, it led to the new stage, that is the feudalism. So here the serfs' condition was better than the slaves because of these reasons. The first, the tools of the production was their own. There was no more treatment as only a tool or a commodity. The serfs could work independently. The production was their own, which they could use for themselves or exchange with something else. And that is why, because of all these reasons, they had an interest in improving the tools of production and method of production. And that is why the production here, the level of production was higher than the slavery system. But then again, feudalism also declined. So what led to the decline of feudalism? The first thing, it was in this feudalism, again as time slowly passed, people started to improve their means of production. They started to have improved tools. Also there started to come middle class people who were the burghers. Factories started to be established, and again because factory was establishing, and then people, their towns were started to grow, and so in the factories workers were required, but then the workers could be got only from the serfs. But then the serfs were very much restricted. The serfs did not have, they could not leave their land. They were attached to the land, and they were not allowed to leave the land without the permission of the landowners. But then the growing factories or the growing towns, they needed more labor. So that labor could have gotten only from the serfs, but then they were attached to the feudal restrictions, and also the feudal system was a closed economy. So the thing that was required for improvement in production, resources were required for the improvement in production. So because of all these, but then feudal system was restricting it, because feudal system was a closed society. So because of this, it led to conflict, and conflict led to the change in the mode of production, and when again the change in the mode of production, it led to the change in the society, and society moved from this stage to again another stage. So this is how feudalism again declined, and then it's passed on to next stage, where the next stage is the stage where there is capitalism. That is the stage where we are in. So again, because of the need of the society for the new means or improvement in the production, the feudalism stage ended, and it brought about a new stage, that is the capitalist stage, which required open economy and which required very less restrictions so that the production could improve freely. And because all of these was not found in the feudalist stage, that is why the feudalist stage declined, and then it moved on to the next stage, that is the stage of capitalism. So here in this stage, the society is divided into two classes: the capitalist class or the bourgeois, and the working class, that is the proletariat. So here the proletariats are free workers. They are not like the serfs who are attached to a land. They can go here and there, but then the proletariats are again exploited by the capitalist class, because the capitalist main motive is profit, and profit can be gained only by surplus value, and surplus value is actually belonging to the proletariats, but then the surplus value is all taken by the capitalist class, and that is how exploitation happens. So Karl Marx says that as long as inequality and conflict is there in society, again the society will change. So here in the capitalist stage also, because there is conflict between the owners and the workers, that is why again this stage of society is bound to change. That is why it is called a transitional stage, and that is why Karl Marx says that this stage of society will also decline. However, this is like a prediction of Karl Marx. And then when this capitalist stage will decline, the next stage, that is the last stage that will come about, is the communism. So main features of communism is, here there is no private property, and hence there will be no class, no inequality and exploitation. And lastly, the motto of communism is that from each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs. So here these are the 5 stages of society. So in this historical materialism, by giving Karl Marx has given the 5 stages of society. He is trying to say that society changes because of the economy, because of the mode of production, also because of the conflict. So because there was conflict between the slaves and the slave owners, again because of that conflict it gave rise to a new mode of production, that is feudalism. But again in feudalism there is conflict between the serfs and the landowners. Again there was change in the mode of production, and because there was change in the mode of production, again it led to a new stage of society, that is capitalist stage. Again capitalist stage has a conflict between the workers, that is the bourgeois, and the proletariat. Again the mode of production changes and the society will move on to the next and the last stage, that is communism. So as long as there is conflict, society is bound to change, and the main motivator, the main facilitator of this change in society is because of economy, is because of the mode of production. Society is constantly trying to improve the means of production, improve the level of production. So it is because of this motive that society moves forward. So this is how Karl Marx has defined history with the eye taking into perspective the economy of society.